Ram or Namaste. My name is Dinesh Budram, and I am here to speak to you about how monkeys, bears, and squirrels contributed to developing Hinduism in Guyana. This presentation is a part of the 2020 Waves HSC conference. So, in this presentation, what we'll be doing is we'll be describing how the Shri Ramcharitimanasa, which was a sacred retelling of the Ramayana written by Goswami Tulsidas Ji, became such a great authoritative text for the Hindus of Guyana. So, just for everyone to know, Guyana is a country in South America neighboring Venezuela, and that country is where my family is from. Okay, so what is the Ramchitamanasa? So, as I said, it is a retelling of the Ramayana, or in sense, or meaning the journey of Rama, where we are told about Rama, who is the incarnation of Lord Vishnu in Hinduism, and how he comes to earth in order to reestablish righteousness. Now, in the Ramchitamanasa, it is a retelling of the Ramayana, which was written by Valmiki. Many scholars believe that the Ramayana was written in 5000 BCE and it was written in Sanskrit. The sage Valmiki is believed to have been a contemporary of Lord Rama, and he is also featured in the scriptures later on. However, the Tulsidas Ramchitamanasa, it was written in around 1600 CE in the language known as Awadhi. And this language is a precursor to Hindi, and it is a language spoken in northern India. And it is still spoken today. Now, before I speak in more detail about the Ramchitamanasa, I'll have to tell you some history about Guyana. So, in 1833, we had the ending of the slave trade by the British. And we have, as we all know, unfortunately, slavery was the labor source for many of the European powers in many parts of the world, especially in their plantation areas. And Guyana was no different. Guyana was a sugar plantation area. And after 1833, they needed a labor source for the British. So the British were also ruling India at the time. And what they did was they recruited people from different parts of India. Most most of the people who went to Guyana were from northern India. They were from Uttar Pradesh, and some were from Bihar, in addition to some parts of South India. And they were sent to Guyana under contracts as indentured servants. Now, these indentured servants, they were promised a better life than what they were experiencing in India. They were promised to have a lot of monetary gain, and they were told many great things about moving to this new land. Many of the recruiters were known as Arkatis, and those were the people who were persuading the people of India to leave and travel to Guyana. So many of the people left to Guyana to seek better life opportunities for themselves. And this Indian diaspora is important because it not only occurred in Guyana, but we also had a diaspora in different parts of the world, such as Mauritius, in Fiji, and different parts of the world. We have these movements of people. And it was not only by the British, but we also have other colonial powers such as the French and the Dutch as well. So these Indians who were sent to Guyana, many of them were packed in boats. And here we see an example of a boat, the Hasrefa Hesperus boat, and it was a very, very difficult set of conditions to be on the boat. Many times the people were jam packed in areas and they were crowded and they didn't have proper access to restrooms or proper conditions for everyone to lay down or to be comfortable while on the boat. And many of the people, they were treated very harshly. They were given very, very low nutrient food to consume, and they were told, they were treated very harshly, almost as if they were animals. However, many of these people that were going, they they endured the conditions on the boat, and they traveled across the Kalapani, or the dark waters, in order to get to Guyana and to start their new lives. There were some instances of people jumping off of the boat. However, a majority of the population who left, they went. And when they traveled, they carried along with them, for the Hindus especially, they carried along their scriptures. And the Ramcharitamanasa was one of the scriptures that they took with them. As for my guru, Swami Chidganan Parivrajagji of the Brahmrishi mission, these scriptures were considered as gold for these people who were moving. Now, upon reaching to Guyana, there were, there were lots of work that needed to be done, and therefore, many of the people who left India, they were male. Now, in this chart, we see a breakdown of the demographics of the people who left, and they went to all the different British colonies. In Guyana, we have 53,000 adult males, and we have 16,983 females. Now, that is almost three times as much males as females going to Guyana. And because of that, some of the women experienced harsh conditions while there. However, the Ramcharitamanasa, being a scripture which describes the ideals of people, of men, women, and every situation in life, it gave the people a better respect for women and men. And I'm not just speaking of Hindus, I'm speaking of all religions that were present in Guyana. So upon going to Guyana, they had to work and literally build themselves up. And they spent the days almost from sunrise to sunset working in the fields. They would have a manager who would instruct them to tend the land and care for it. And many times they were not given breaks. They were beaten. They were in the hot sun, and they were treated almost similarly to what slaves had to endure prior to them going. The indentured servants, they were left in cramped spaces such as logis, which are large ranges of housing where families would be cramped in spaces, almost a room for each family or group. And they were very long and and there were large numbers of people occupying small spaces. Actually, my grandmother, she was born on a logie. However, in spite of all of these difficult conditions, they still found ways of maintaining their cultures. Now, this is a flag of Guyana during the late 1800s, which depicts the flag of Great Britain and a ship, which could be one of the ships that carried the indentured servants. Now, these indentured servants, they were paid very little and they were signed to contracts where if they worked for X amount of years, many times being 5 years, they were entitled to land opportunities. However, many times the British, they did not, they made the indentured servants work even more. Many times they would keep the men working outside and the women would work domestically and sometimes taking care of children. In addition, in Guyana, we don't have only Hindus present, but we had a large Christian missionary presence, and we also had a large Indian Muslim population who also went to Guyana. Now, I'll speak more of the Christian missionaries because they were tied into the colonialism that was present, in that they were trying mass conversions of the Hindu populations. Many times, the Indians would have to attend schooling by the British Christians, and they were expected to go and learn the Bible and to learn Christian prayers and Christian scriptures while completing their education. And this became a very big issue for some devout Hindus who believed in other faiths. Now I'll go back to the Ramcharitamānasa to further explain. So, as I said earlier, the Ramcharitamānasa was written in 1600 by Goswami Tulsidas. Now, Goswami Tulsidas was a saint who was a part of what historians refer to as the Bhakti movement of India, where we have a lot of great poetry, religious and non religious poetry occurring in the age. Now, Goswami Tulsidas, she lived during four Mughal emperors of India, and there was also a large Muslim presence where he was. Now, in Hinduism, we have guru lineages, which are where we have one spiritual master and he carries down his traditions from disciple to disciple. And his teachings are rooted in some scripture and are devoted to some deity. Now, in this case, Tulsidas was a part of the lineage belonging to Swami Ramananda. Now, Swami Ramananda was a sage who believed that in a sectarian society where everyone, regardless to socioeconomic status or education, could have access to learning scriptures and to do anything that they would like to do in a religion, because in his eyes everyone was a child of Mother Sita and Father Rama. And this sort of attitude and many of the teachings that were drawn by Swami Ramananda are given by Tulsidashi in the Shri Ramcharitimanasa. He did not look to say, okay, only males could be disciples of me, or only males can learn, but any gender could have learned under him. His teachings promoted an equal society and he was also living through large convergence to Islam during the time. Now, in Hinduism, we have many deities who are worshipped. However, Hindus believe in one God, one supreme God, and that God comes in different forms for different reasonings to help their devotees. Here, where my mouse is pointing, we have Lord Rama with Mother Sita and his brother Lakshman, and at his feet is Hanuman, who is the Lord of Strength. Now, three of the main deities in Hinduism are Lord Vishnu, who is here in the middle, Devi, who is mainly represented as Durga, or Mother Durga, and Lord Shiva, who is another supreme deity in Sanatana Dharma. Many of the deities are interconnected to one another. For example, Lord Vishnu, he has incarnated 10 times on this earth, and he has come as Rama and Krishna as well as many other forms. Lord Shiva, he has also incarnated as Hanuman. And Durga, she also comes in different forms, such as Mother Kali, who is the goddess of destruction. In Sanatana Dharma, we also worship nature. So, nature is worshiping the earth, which is depicted as a cow. Now, the reason the cow is worshipped is because of how much the cow gives. In addition, we have the planets. Surya, who is the sun, he is the chief deity of the Navgraha. Graha meaning planetary bodies. And we have each one of the planets who are worshipped in our solar system who are worshipped. In addition, we have the sacred rivers. For example, we have the, the Ganges in their personification as Mother Ganga. She is also worshipped. Now, here we also have the Ardhanarishwara form of Lord Shiva and Mother Parvati, which is depicting God and the nature of God, which is what we'll speak about. So, in Hinduism, there are numerous ways of worshiping. Some Hindus most commonly complete pujas or intricate worships to deities. Many times they worship a deity for a certain benefit that they can gain or because of having love or devotion for the deity. Now, in the Ramcharitamanosa, Lord Rama, he worships Lord Shiva. So, an incarnation of Lord Vishnu is worshipping Lord Shiva directly. And we also have Hanuman, who is the prime devotee of Rama. He is also worshipping Lord Vishnu in this form. Now, in this Ramcharitamanosa, it explains how puja is done, and this served as a guide for the indentured servants in the Hindu population who was in Guyana at the time. During puja, we have offerings of water to cleanse the murtis or the deities in their forms, whether they be a picture or a stone representation. Afterwards, the deities are given clothes, they're given food, they're given flowers and different items. And afterwards, the ceremony, we have a fire ceremony where offerings such as rice, or dried leaves are given into fire. Now, what that signifies is purifying the air, and also Agni, who is the god of fire, his job is to be the messenger between this loka or this realm and the realm of the deities. So, while we had the indentured servant system going on, many of the Hindus resisted to British colonial rule by retaining what they knew about doing from the Ramcharitamanasa and from other scriptures. The Ramcharitamanasa served as a great example because Rama is considered as an ideal person, and he upkept his words, he upkept his duty or his dharma, and he was able to do many great things for the world. Now, after Guyana became independent in the 1960s, we had two prominent Hindu organizations form. One was the Guyana Pandits Council, and the second was the Guyana Hindu Dharmic Sabha. These two groups were important because they were two champion groups of Hinduism in Guyana, and they both relied on the Ramcharitamanasa to serve as their main guide of retaining Hindu culture in the country. For example, the Guyana Pandits Council is responsible for training pundits who are officiators of Hindu ceremonies and the ones who teach knowledge from the scriptures, especially Ramcharitamanasa. And in 1967, the we had an act where the Pandits Council would train people to do weddings in Guyana. In addition, both groups teach young aspiring Pandits and young Hindus about their culture. Now, I use the word Pandit, however, Pandit does not only refer to male priests, but Panditas as well as female priests. So, in an example, we have the late great Ripudaman Prasad ji, who was the founder of the Dharmic Sabha. And in this short clip, I'll just show him motivating the crowd during a yajna.
I love my dharma. I remain and will remain unshaken in it. Nothing can move me away from the very fabric and foundation of this great heritage to which I belong. I remain in it and I serve in it with pride, with dignity, with confidence, and shares the faith that this dharma will continue not only within the borders of Guyana, but in every other corner of the world. As we look in the year 2004, the percentage of people who serve Sanatana Dharma, who work for Sanatana Dharma, has not decreased. But not only percentage I look at and numbers, but in Guyana, there has never been the involvement in such a positive way of so many young people ever before. And I speak with at least 50 years experience.
So, in many cases, we had yajnas or ceremonies where pundits or learned people would explain the scriptures to the masses of individuals who were present. Now, another example which stems from the Indian traditions is a Swami or a master of the scriptures, for example, such as Tulsidas or Swami Ramanandaji, who were great Swamis and they studied in this tradition. Now, including them is my Guruji, Swami Chidganan Parivrajak, and in this clip, I'll show him explaining a part of the Ramchitamanasa.
Both then so Kashyapa Aditi Kashyapa Aditi Kashyap Aditi Taha Pitu Mata Dasharat Kausalya Vikhyata. The same Kashyap and Aditi, they became Dasharat and Kausalya. Dasharat and Kausalya. And yes, Dasharat, Dasharat, one Dharma Patni. I don't want to use the word wife because a wife has a complete different meaning than Dharma Patni.
So, what Swamiji is showing is the fashion in how Ramchitamanasa is explained during a yajna, where you have a singing of a part of the Ramayana known as Chapai in Awadhi, followed by an explanation of the verse in English.
Okay?
Now, many times these events would not just be yajnas or long events of explaining the scriptures, but there would be sometimes day long events known as a jandi. Now, the word jandi in Sanskrit it means a flag. However, in this case, the word jandi became known to mean the event of doing a puja at your home and many times explaining the scriptures at your home, followed by taking flags and putting it on your property, typically outside, indicating that you have the deity respected in your home or at your home. Many times this is based on the Ramchitamanasa because Hanumanji, he carried with him a flag and the flag represented his duty and his willingness to serve. Now, Hanumanji isn't the only one with a flag that can be used. Many times people would make a flag for Lord Shiva or for Mother Durga or any one of the deities that they were worshipping, they would create a flag for. And typically the flag was hoisted by a bamboo. In Narantra and Manasa, we also have weddings, which are explained. We have two weddings in the Balkand. The first, it's a quote, chapter of the Ramchitamanasa. We have the wedding of Lord Shiva and Mother Parvati. And later on, we have the wedding between Mother Sita and Lord Rama. Now, these two weddings are explained in detail in the Ramcharitamānasa, and they served as guides for the Hindus of Guyana. In addition, we have the funerals services that were done in the Ramcharitamānasa. For example, here we have Dasharatha, who is the father of Lord Rama. He unfortunately passes away while Lord Rama is in exile, and his last rites are performed by Lord Rama's brothers. In addition, we have the death of Jatayu, who was a bird who tried to rescue Mother Sita from the demon Ravana. However, Ravana conquered the bird, and Lord Rama and Lakshmana, while in the forest, they find the bird nearly lifeless, and they, after seeing his devotion and his respect, they performed the last rites for Jatayu. In addition, funerals are also discussed in Ramcharitamānasa, and these also served as guides for the people of Guyana. Now, other sanskars or other birth milestone traditions are spoken about in Ramcharitamānasa. For example, to be initiated with a guru is known as the Yagyopavitam Sanskar or the Upanaya Sanskar, and Lord Rama and his brothers here are seen with one of their gurus who is Vishwamit Muni. There are also many other sanskaras which are discussed or traditions, and the Hindus of Guyana they followed these traditions in the scriptures. Now, another teaching of Swami Ramananda was, as I said, equality for everyone. Now, Lord Rama, while in the forest, he meets one of his greatest devotees, who is known as Shavari. Now, Shavari was a low economically challenged woman, and she faced many hardships in her life. However, one thing that she had was pure devotion for Lord Rama, and she spent much of her life praying and hoping for Rama to come. And when Lord Rama comes to her, he is very happy to see her, and he tells her after she says that she is not worthy of being in the presence of Rama because of her state. Lord Rama tells her that Jati Pati Kula Dharma Bharai Dana Bala Parijana Guna Chaturai Bhagati Nara Soe Kesa Binu Jala Barida Dekiya Jesa. He tells her that I do not look at your economic status, I do not look at your societal status, I do not look at your family, nor do I look at your wealth or anything. What I look at mostly is your devotion. And in this next line, what he does is he says, a person without devotion is like a cloud without rain. That cloud is rendered useless. And these words are what inspired Shavari to feel better about herself, and Lord Rama granted her liberation from the world. Now, in addition to the teachings of Tulsidasji, we had many great sages and schools of Hindu philosophy represented in Guyana. Now, I spoke about my Guruji, Swami Chidganan Parirajakji, and his guru is known as the great Visvatva Bharataji Maharaj, who is a part of the International Brahm Rishi Mission. And this mission is the same lineage as Tulsidas Ji and Swami Ramananda. Vishwatma Bharata Maharaj Ji was a very great soul in India, and he established many great hospitals and orphanages and many great places. And he taught many of his disciples the greatness of Lord Rama and the philosophy of not just the Ramcharitamānasa, but many scriptures in Hinduism. And this could be said for many of these other great reformers of Hinduism. However, before I speak of them, I'd like to speak of Sri Prakash Gosai, who also was a great disciple of Sri Vishwata Bharataji Maharaj. And I would like to speak to him because he is considered the Tulsidas of the West by many of his followers in New York. Now, the reason why Goswami by Sri Prakash Gosai is so noteworthy is because after moving to New York, he propagated Sanatana Dharma and he explained in many of his yajnas about the teachings of Lord Rama. And he explained doing puja, he explained many of the traditions and the sanskaras, and it became very accessible via CDs and via books that he published and he created for the Indo Caribbean community at large. Now, Sri Prakash Gosai was one of the many examples of people who left Guyana during the 60s and 70s because of economic hardship due to the government of Guyana during that time. Here's an example of him.
This is the beautiful Chaupai Goswami. That he is not the originator of Ramayana, but Sambhu ki naya charit suhava. Who is Sambhu? Lord Shiva. Bhagwan Shankar, my dear brothers and sisters.
So Sri Prakash Gosai he served as a standard of how a pandit should conduct themselves in performing these puja and explanations of Sri Ramcharitimanasa. Now, in addition to the influences on the Ramcharitamanasa from Goswami Tulsidas Ji and Swami Ramananda Ji, we have other great philosophies. We have the teachings of Swami Pranavananda. We also have influences from the Ramakrishna mission, which was led by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Swami Vivekananda Ji. We also have the Chinmaya mission also present, which is the teachings of Swami Chinmayananda as well. Swami Chinmayananda is very popular in the Caribbean. His teachings are present and alive, especially in Trinidad, which is a neighboring country to Guyana, by Swami Prakashananda Ji. We also have the Arya Samaj, which was founded by Swami Dayanand Saraswati. In addition, we have the teachings of Satya Sai Baba and Shirdi Sai Baba as well. And lastly, there is the presence of the ISKCON, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, which was founded by Srila Prabhupada Ji. And these schools of philosophies all spoke about the Ramcharitamanasas in some detail. Now, the Ramcharitamanasa is celebrated up to this day in Guyana and in the diaspora as well, in many parts of the United States, in Canada, and England, and different parts of the world. The Ramcharitamanasa became a symbol of Guyanese Hindu identity. And an example is this Ramnavami service, which is done by a very renowned Pandit from Guyana who is known as Sri Rajan Balgobinji. And here's a short clip of his Ram Navami, or the birth of Lord Rama. Now, as we discussed earlier, it was not only the oration of the Ramcharitamanasa, but it was also the teachings of the scripture. So one thing was the worship of the deities in the Sri Ramcharitamanasa. As we spoke about earlier, worship was not only done to one deity, but Tulsidashi encouraged worship done to many other deities because they were all considered as equal and supreme, and they were all complementary to each other. For example, Lord Ganesha, who is the elephant-headed deity, he is worshipped by Tulsidas in addition to Mother Saraswati, who is the goddess of learning, in addition to Mother Saraswati, in addition to Lord Shiva and Mother Parvati and Lord Vishnu and the other deities. And this style of puja is another defining characteristic of Hinduism in Guyana, and it stems primarily from the teaching of the Ramcharitamanasa, which were to worship the different deities, because there was no difference in between worshiping them because they were all great. So the Ramcharitamanasa, it continues to serve as a guide for individuals in Guyana and and for the descendants of those people. And it is greatly respected in this community and around the world. I do hope that this presentation has shed some light into understanding how the scripture served as a means of retaining the identity and the culture of the Hindu population in early Guyana, and it served as a way of not only recreation, but it served as a mean of the Hindu population better understanding and growing their faith and love in a new land. I do hope that this presentation will also serve to encourage the youth to better learn of their traditions, regardless if you're a Hindu or of a different faith, to better understand your family's upbringing, your family culture, and your traditions. Thank you very much for your time.